FBI agent Kevin Stone had faced many dangerous missions in his career, but nothing had prepared him for this one. His assignment was to go undercover at the heart of a police department plagued by deep corruption. It wasn't just about a few bad officers. There were whispers of political crimes, kidnappings, illegal adoptions, and wrongful arrests. Kevin's task was to infiltrate the department, gather evidence, and bring the criminals to justice. To do this, he had to become invisible. His cover? A humble janitor. Dressed in a faded gray uniform with the name tag Mike, Kevin entered the police department for the first time with a mop and bucket. His heart pounded, but he kept his face expressionless, trying to blend in. Nobody looked twice at him, just the way he wanted it. He was just another worker in the background, tasked with cleaning up after the officers, emptying trash cans, and wiping down desks. He quietly mopped the floors while his sharp eyes and ears took in every detail. The corruption in the department ran deep. Kevin's FBI brief had laid out the disturbing allegations. Some officers were suspected of kidnapping children from vulnerable families, forcing illegal adoptions to the highest bidders. Worse, they were also working with crooked politicians, carrying out wrongful arrests to eliminate political enemies or protect the powerful. The officers involved had used their badges to hide behind a veil of authority, committing crimes under the very system they had sworn to protect. As Kevin cleaned the halls of the station, he felt the weight of the mission pressing down on him. He had to tread carefully. A single slip, a wrong move, and his cover would be blown, placing his life in grave danger. But he knew the importance of what he was doing. There were families out there who had lost their children, innocent people languishing in prison because of the corrupt actions of these officers. He was their only hope for justice. At first, Kevin kept his distance, observing the officers from afar. They paid him little attention as they went about their business. Many of them spoke freely in front of him, assuming he was just a harmless janitor with no real understanding of what was going on. It didn't take long for Kevin to pick up on the tension between the officers. Some were clearly involved in the criminal activities, their conversations laced with cryptic remarks about deals and deliveries, while others seemed oblivious, too busy with their daily routines to notice the corruption festering in the department. One evening, while emptying trash cans in the locker room, Kevin overheard a conversation that sent a chill down his spine. Two officers were discussing a new shipment, an innocent phrase that could easily be brushed off by anyone else. But Kevin knew better. His instincts told him that they weren't talking about a shipment of supplies. They were referring to children, likely stolen from their families, about to be trafficked in the illegal adoption scheme. Kevin's heart raced as he listened, but he had to remain calm. He made sure his back was turned, pretending to focus on cleaning while straining to hear more. The officers mentioned a time and place, something about a delivery happening soon. This was the breakthrough Kevin had been waiting for. He needed more details, but now he had a lead. His mission was starting to move in the right direction. As days passed, Kevin continued to gather bits of evidence. He stayed silent, playing his role as the janitor, but his mind was always racing. He memorized the officers' schedules, paid attention to their routines, and noted who spoke to whom. He knew he couldn't trust anyone, not even the officers who seemed kind or indifferent. The corruption ran too deep, and anyone could be involved. However, Kevin couldn't help but notice one officer who stood out from the rest. Officer Sarah. She was friendly, always polite, and seemed genuinely concerned about her job. She often stopped to chat with Kevin as he cleaned, asking how his day was going and offering him coffee. Kevin appreciated her kindness, but his training kept him cautious. In an undercover mission like this, trust was dangerous. He wasn't sure whether she was an honest officer or part of the dark underbelly of the department. For now, he kept his guard up. As Kevin navigated through his undercover life, he faced close calls that nearly exposed him. Once, he walked in on a group of officers in the evidence room. They looked at him with suspicion as he apologized and quickly exited. His heart had raced as he left, knowing that just being in the wrong place at the wrong time could ruin everything. Every day, the tension grew thicker. Kevin knew he was walking a fine line. The department was a ticking time bomb, and the deeper he went, the more dangerous it became. But he was determined to bring down the criminals who had turned a police department into a hub for political corruption, kidnapping, and illegal adoptions. For now, he would keep his head down, his mop in hand, and his eyes wide open. The truth was close, but Kevin had no idea just how dangerous things were about to get. For weeks, Kevin Stone continued his undercover work as a janitor, each day growing more dangerous. Every time he walked into the police department, mop in hand, he knew he was inching closer to uncovering the truth. But the weight of what he was learning was heavy. Corruption ran deeper than he had imagined. The officers' involvement in political crimes, kidnappings, and illegal adoptions seemed even more sinister with every piece of evidence he uncovered. Kevin had started piecing together a picture of the players involved. Sergeant Douglas, a towering figure with a commanding presence, appeared to be one of the ringleaders. Kevin had often overheard him talking in hushed tones about deals and arrangements. Although Douglas was careful with his words, Kevin's FBI training helped him read between the lines. It was clear that Douglas was involved in something dark and dangerous. He was the type of officer who never got his hands dirty, but orchestrated everything behind the scenes. One day, while mopping the floors near Douglas' office, Kevin overheard him speaking on the phone. Douglas' voice was low, but Kevin caught fragments of the conversation. "Don't worry. The child will be delivered. Payment will be made in full. No mistakes this time." Kevin's stomach turned. He knew that the child in question was likely a victim of the illegal adoption ring. The officers were taking children from vulnerable families, falsifying documents to make it appear as though the adoptions were legal, and selling them to the highest bidders. It was horrifying, and Kevin was determined to stop it. However, he couldn't act too quickly. He needed solid proof before he could make his move. Each day, Kevin gathered bits of information, mentally cataloging names, times, and places. His role as a janitor made it easy for him to go unnoticed. Officers talked freely around him, assuming he wasn't paying attention, which worked to his advantage. But it also meant he was constantly at risk of being discovered. One evening, Kevin found himself in a particularly tense situation. He was cleaning the evidence room when two officers, McCarthy and Jenkins, walked in. They were both involved in the illegal activities and had been under Kevin's watch for some time. McCarthy was a blunt, gruff man, while Jenkins was quieter but always lurking in the background. "Hey, what are you doing in here?" McCarthy barked, his eyes narrowing at Kevin. Kevin froze, gripping the mop handle tightly. He had been trying to stay out of sight, but there was no easy way to explain why a janitor would be in the evidence room after hours. "I'm just cleaning, sir," Kevin said, keeping his voice steady. "They told me to do all the rooms tonight." McCarthy's eyes were cold as he stared at Kevin, his suspicion evident. "Well, you don't need to be in here. Get out." Kevin quickly gathered his supplies and left, his heart pounding. He had barely escaped their scrutiny. Any slip-up could lead to the officers realizing who he really was, and if that happened, Kevin knew his life would be in danger. The corruption in the department wasn't just about money. These men were ruthless. If they discovered his true identity as an FBI agent, they wouldn't hesitate to silence him permanently. Despite the danger, Kevin continued his mission, even as the tension around him grew thicker. His friendship with Officer Sarah, the kind officer who always stopped to talk with him, became one of the few moments of relief. Sarah seemed different from the others, genuinely dedicated to her work and unaware of the darkness surrounding her. She often chatted with Kevin, sharing stories about her day and how frustrated she was with some of the department's politics. Kevin began to wonder if Sarah could help him. Maybe she could be an ally, someone he could trust to expose the corruption. But his training reminded him to be cautious. Trusting someone too quickly could lead to disaster. He couldn't be sure whether Sarah was truly innocent or if she was part of the corruption, cleverly hiding her involvement. One night, Kevin overheard a conversation that made his blood run cold. Two officers were discussing a high-profile political arrest that was about to take place. They were framing an innocent politician, a rival of a powerful figure who had paid them off to make the arrest. This was the proof Kevin needed. The officers were not only involved in illegal adoptions and kidnappings, but were also pulling the strings in political crimes, shaping the future of the city through corrupt arrests. Kevin knew he was close. The stakes were higher than ever. He had enough information to bring down several officers, but he needed solid evidence. Documents, audio recordings, something concrete to ensure these criminals would face justice. The clock was ticking, and the risk of exposure was growing. His gut told him that something big was about to happen, and he had to be ready for it. The next time he walked into the station, everything felt different. The air was thick with tension, and he sensed the officers were on edge. Something was brewing, and Kevin couldn't shake the feeling that his cover was hanging by a thread. He had been careful, but the deeper he got into the investigation, the more dangerous it became. And soon, he would face the moment that would change everything. But what Kevin didn't know was that the danger wasn't just coming from the corrupt officers. It was coming from someone much closer. Someone he thought he could trust. The real betrayal was just around the corner, and it would leave him questioning everything. The tension in the police department had become unbearable. FBI agent Kevin Stone, still disguised as the janitor, could feel it in the air. Something big was about to happen. The officers were more cautious, their conversations quieter, and their movements more deliberate. They were on high alert, and Kevin knew that his cover was hanging by a thread. He had gathered crucial information over the past few weeks, evidence that could blow the case wide open, but he needed something more, something solid, undeniable. That evening, after most of the staff had left, Kevin made his way to the chief's office. He had overheard Sergeant Douglas mention earlier that the chief was leaving some important documents in his office overnight. Kevin knew this was his chance to find the proof he needed to expose the corruption. His hand shook slightly as he turned the knob of the office door and stepped inside, the dim light casting long shadows across the room. The office was eerily quiet, the only sound being the soft hum of the air conditioning. Kevin's heart pounded in his chest as he began searching through the drawers and files on the desk. After a few minutes, he found a hidden folder behind a cabinet. He carefully opened it and was met with a shocking sight. Inside were official documents detailing illegal adoptions, fake arrest warrants, and political payoffs. The names of high-ranking officers and politicians were written clearly, and there were records of children being taken from families under false pretenses. Kevin stared at the pages, his breath catching in his throat. This was it. The evidence he needed. With these documents, he could bring down the entire operation. He quickly took pictures of the papers with his hidden camera, but as he slipped the folder back into place, he heard footsteps approaching the office door. His pulse quickened as he turned off the small light and ducked behind a filing cabinet. The door creaked open slowly, and in walked Officer Sarah. Kevin's heart sank. Of all people, he hadn't expected her. For a moment, he felt a sense of relief. Maybe she had come to help. After all, Sarah had always seemed different from the others, more honest and kind. But something in her expression was off. Her usual warmth was replaced with cold calculation. "Kevin," she said softly, closing the door behind her. Or should I say, Agent Stone. Kevin's blood ran cold. She knew. His cover had been blown. "Sarah," he whispered, stepping out from behind the filing cabinet. "What are you doing here?" She let out a small, bitter laugh, shaking her head. "I've known who you were from the beginning," she said, her voice hard. "Did you really think you could just waltz in here, pretending to be a janitor, and no one would notice? You've been under surveillance since day one." Kevin felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. You've been watching me this whole time?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah nodded, her face devoid of emotion. "I'm not just an officer. I've been a part of this operation from the start. Did you really think I was the good cop you could trust? I was assigned to keep an eye on you, make sure you didn't get too close." The room spun as Kevin processed her words. The one person he had believed might be an ally was actually one of the key players in the corruption. Sarah had been using their friendship to monitor him, feeding information to the corrupt officers while pretending to be on the outside. "I thought you were different," Kevin said, his voice strained with disbelief. "I thought you wanted to do the right thing." Sarah's eyes flashed with something unreadable. Maybe regret, maybe guilt, but it disappeared as quickly as it came. "This is bigger than you, Kevin. Bigger than me. These people have power, influence. They can make anyone disappear, including you, if you don't cooperate." Kevin's mind raced. He had to think quickly. "So, what happens now?" he asked, his voice steady despite the fear rising in his chest. Sarah shrugged. "That depends on you. If you hand over what you found and walk away, maybe, just maybe, you'll make it out of here alive. Otherwise, the chief and the others won't be as forgiving." Kevin's heart pounded. He knew that he was in a life-or-death situation. If he handed over the documents, everything he had worked for would be destroyed, and the corrupt officers would continue their illegal activities unchecked. But if he refused, his life would be in serious danger. The room seemed to close in around him, the weight of Sarah's betrayal crushing him. But Kevin wasn't ready to give up. His mind raced as he considered his options. He still had the photos of the documents on his hidden camera. He could use those as leverage. But how could he escape this room without alerting the other officers? "You don't have a choice, Kevin," Sarah said, stepping closer. "Give me the documents." Kevin swallowed hard, weighing his options. He reached into his pocket slowly, as if complying, but his mind was already formulating a plan. He knew he couldn't trust her. He was running out of time, and he had to act fast. The officers were closing in, and he needed to escape before it was too late. He had one chance left, and it would come down to a final desperate move. The betrayal was more than just a personal blow. It was the turning point in the mission. Kevin had been walking a tightrope for weeks, but now the line was about to snap. With his heart racing and adrenaline surging through his veins, Kevin knew that everything would change in the next few moments. Kevin's mind raced, every second feeling like an eternity as he stared down Officer Sarah. The sense of betrayal stung deep, but he couldn't afford to dwell on it. His life was hanging by a thread, and every moment counted. Sarah had cornered him in the chief's office, demanding the documents that would expose the entire corrupt network of officers, politicians, and their dark web of illegal activities. But Kevin wasn't about to give up so easily. He had spent weeks risking his life, gathering evidence to bring justice to the victims of the illegal adoption ring, the wrongful arrests, and the political crimes these officers had committed. There was no way he was going to let Sarah, the person he thought he could trust, take everything away from him. He needed to find a way out. "You think this is the end for me?" Kevin said, his voice calm but full of resolve. "You think I'm just going to hand over these documents and walk away?" Sarah stepped closer, her eyes cold. "You don't have a choice. If you don't hand them over, the chief will know. And trust me, Kevin, you don't want him to deal with you personally." Kevin's heart pounded, but he couldn't let her see his fear. He had to buy time. He needed a distraction, anything to break the tension and give him a chance to escape. His fingers brushed against the hidden camera in his pocket, the photos of the documents safely stored. If he could get out of the building alive, he could still blow the entire operation wide open. "I'll cooperate," Kevin said, raising his hand slightly as if to show he was giving in. "But how do I know you're not just going to get rid of me after I hand everything over? I'm not stupid, Sarah. Once you have the documents, I'm a liability." Sarah hesitated, her eyes narrowing. "That's not up to me. But if you cooperate, you have a chance. If you don't." She left the sentence unfinished, but the threat hung in the air. Kevin could feel the tension building. He had to act fast. His mind raced as he formulated a plan. He had noticed earlier that there was a fire extinguisher near the door. If he could reach it, he might be able to create enough of a distraction to make his move. Slowly, Kevin reached into his pocket, pretending to pull out the documents. Sarah watched him carefully, her guard up but not yet realizing what he was about to do. In one quick motion, Kevin lunged toward the fire extinguisher, yanking it off the wall. Before Sarah could react, he sprayed a thick cloud of foam directly at her, disorienting her and blocking her vision. "Kevin!" she screamed, stumbling backward, but it was too late. Kevin bolted out of the office, the heavy thud of his footsteps echoing through the empty hallways. He had only moments before the entire department would be alerted to his escape. As he ran, Kevin's mind was laser-focused. He needed to get to the exit and call for backup. The FBI team had been waiting for his signal, but now the situation had spiraled out of control. He raced down the stairs, the sound of shouting officers behind him growing louder with every step. His heart hammered in his chest, but he couldn't stop now. He had to survive. He had to expose the truth.